During the week I spent in Japan while traveling to document Christian students' experiences at secular universities around the world, I learned some interesting lessons, like how to eat raw squid with chopsticks, and how to buy train tickets in countries where I can't even read the signs. And more importantly, why Japan has so few Christians. By way of a quick recap, so far in my travels, I'd visited nations including Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines. Along the way, it hadn't taken me long to figure out that the first three nations found their worldviews on man's word, as opposed to the only other foundation for thinking, God's word. Like other Western countries, they've dismissed God's word as scientifically irrelevant thanks to years of embracing evolutionary interpretations of science that contradict a Christian worldview at its very root. Genesis 1-11. Now, as Ken Ham's book Gospel Reset explains, the gospel seems as foreign to Westerners now as it did to the Greeks of Paul's time. The Greeks, like modern Westerners, had no foundational understanding of God's word from the beginning, unlike the Jews of that era. So the Jews responded more readily to the gospel. With these lessons in mind, my first task was to find out the foundation for Japan's worldview, and what that means for Japanese Christian students. To start, I spoke with a retired Japanese diplomat and professor at a church that I attended. And he said, during the modernization of Japan, we imported science and technology from European countries, but we did not pay attention to the spiritual dimension of these Christian nations. That was our greatest mistake. When I asked him what people in Japan believe, he said it's a kind of syncretism, and he explained that religions like Buddhism have been imported to Japan during its modernization. But he said that the native Japanese religion is Shintoism, the worship of physical, natural things. He said beautiful mountains, rivers, rocks, and trees are God. And that, still in Tokyo, there's a major Shinto shrine where 8 million citizens worship on New Year's Day. On other days, they're non-religious. So, the reality is that only 0.4% of Japan's population are Christian, and that includes Catholic and Orthodox Christians. Only half of these are churchgoers. That's 0.2%. So, in a nation relatively free from active persecution against Christianity, why could there be so few Christians? The answer, it turns out, lies in a bit of history. The professor continued that before the Japanese encountered Westerners, the emperors were very much sensitive about invasion from the West. All the nations outside Western Europe were being colonized by Western European powers, with only two exceptions in the world, Japan and Thailand. Thailand lay in convenient equilibrium between French powers to its east and British control to its west. But Japan, being an island, had to resist colonization through only its own tremendous efforts. Part of these efforts included forbidding Christianity and kicking out foreign missionaries, thanks to institutionalized Christianity's cultural association with colonialism. He said that for 3 centuries, the leaders educated the people of Japan that Christianity is dangerous. That is a big factor in why the Christianization of the Japanese people is still very slow. A few days later, I spoke with some Japanese Christian students who unfurled a few more layers of Japan's complex spiritual history for me. One girl said that in 1612, the government made a law prohibiting Christianity, and since then there were lots of hidden Christians. Many people here in Japan still have those prejudices towards Christianity. Then she continued that throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, the fires of persecution raged against Christianity with terrifying ferocity. In fact, the government made a plate called the Fumi-e, which had a picture of Jesus on it. And the government asked everyone to step on this plate. And those who hesitated to step on this picture of Jesus, the faithful Christians, were killed. While Japan no longer ranks among the world's top 50 nations for Christian persecution, the perceived association between Christianity and foreign politics still lingers. For instance, one Christian student told me that her classmates ask, well, if Christians are so kind, why did they kill native people in the countries where they traveled? Her classmate said that Christians use the Bible to justify those murders. Now, we recognize that tragically, professing Christians have participated in atrocities in the past, but it's important to remember that the fact that people have caused evil in the name of Christianity, no matter how unfortunate and hypocritical that is ultimately irrelevant to whether the claims of Christ are true. To find out whether any worldview is morally true or logically correct, we have to look at what happens when that worldview is consistently lived out. And for Christians, that means looking at the life of Christ. When we do that, we find that his actions and commands for believers, like do to others as you'd have them do to you, hardly justify evil deeds. In fact, recent historical research suggests that frequently Protestant missionaries not only criticized many immoral social ills, including slavery, based on biblical teachings, but also played roles in many nations' later development and democratic flourishing. Conversely, if secular worldviews are right to say that God doesn't exist and that no human is made in God's image, from what ultimate moral foundation can we criticize anyone's actions or beliefs in the first place? Thinking about these questions is part of apologetics, the intellectual defense of the Christian faith. Apologetics equips Christians to answer objections and misconceptions regarding their faith, like the idea that the Bible somehow justifies wrongdoings. This is especially important for Christians in nations which, like first-century Greeks, have no foundational familiarity with God's Word. Speaking to Japanese students, therefore, reminded me yet again why Christians around the world need the intellectual foundation of apologetics to navigate Greek classrooms and cultures. So ultimately, while nations like Japan and Western countries might seem pretty different at first glance, they really share an important similarity. Thus, their cultural worldview is founded on man's word rather than God's. While these nations arrived at that foundation of man's word in different ways, the results for Christian students in both places are remarkably similar. Apologetics training to defend the foundation of God's word, therefore, is critical for Christian students, even a world apart. To learn more about my story, about my 360 and 180 mission around the world, and about how you can defend your faith, you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Every week, I'll be releasing a brand new article and video documenting my journey and sharing the critical thinking skills and apologetics materials that Answers in Genesis produces. These are the materials that helped me and can help other Christian youth keep their faith in secular classrooms and cultures.